Good stewards smile and give thanks to God for Lent. In the gospel passage Deacon Jim just read, Jesus says, pray. One more time. He says, talk with me, pray. Now he says, pray in secret. But what he's using is the Jewish hyperbole. Doesn't really mean you always got to go in your room and lock the door. The rest of the homily needs to be taken into consideration. What he's saying is, don't pray to get pats on the back. Elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus says, don't hide your good works under a bushel basket. Let other people see them, but don't let people see them to get praise. That's why he's always down on the Pharisees, because that's why they do everything. They do it to get praise. And Jesus is saying, look, okay, you're going to get your reward right here, right now, with the pat on the back, but you're not going to get a reward up there. This is Lent, first day of Lent. We should pray more during Lent. How much more? You make the decision. I don't know how much you're praying. But I'm going to recommend that you pray at least 10 minutes every day. Now, that can be 10 minutes. It can be 5 2-minute segments. It can be 20, 30-second segments. It can be any combination. But pray to God. And what should be the focus of that prayer this Lent? Here's my recommendation on that. Give thanks. Let's put our lives into perspective. Let's go back just 35,000 years ago. People were living under the skies. They didn't have houses. Most of them didn't have tents. They slept outside. If it was February, and let's say it was Minnesota, might be 10 degrees out there. Cloudy. No moon, no starlight, pitch black. Wolves howling off in the distance. Scared to death. And here is the really brutal part. They had no hope. They didn't have a sense of heaven. They had very little sense of a God, much less of an eternal, terrific afterlife. In their minds, if those wolves got me tonight, that's it, it's over. It was a brutal life. They might not have eaten 4 days. Those wolves might not have eaten for days. Think just a few seconds while I'm talking, multitask, about all the good things we have in our lives. But here is the really good thing we have in our lives. We not only have hope, we have sure faith, sure belief that the Son of God, we believe there is a God. We believe His Son came down, died on a cross, forgave our sins, and opened to us the gates of heaven. Those people 35, 40,000 years ago, sleeping under a cloudy sky, pitch black, they had none of that. They lived sad lives. We should be living jubilant lives. You know, again, I'm going to turn 75 this year. And I know that I put in most of my time down here on earth, and I believe, I've got faith that God's going to accept me into heaven, where there's going to be perfect joy, where all of my sports teams will win every year. It's going to be terrific. Let me give you one of my favorite stories. I tell it frequently. I tell it especially at funerals. Winston Churchill is a true hero of mine. When I went to London, the highlight of my trip, and I made certain I saw it, was the war room of Winston Churchill. He was a cigar-smoking, gin-drinking curmudgeon. But he had a fabulous mind. He was one of the 20th century's great planners. And trust me, it was because of Winston Churchill single-handedly that Great Britain withstood all that bombing from the Nazis. He kept Great Britain in the war until we Americans finally entered the fray and began turning the tide of the war. One of the things that Winston Churchill planned was his own funeral liturgy, and it was at St. Paul's Cathedral in downtown London. And one of the other places I made certain I saw when I was in London was St. Paul's. Gorgeous. Sky-high ceilings. And up at the top, a round balcony. So high up you can't hardly see it. Well, Winston Churchill planned his own funeral liturgy. It was terrific, I'm told. After it was over, he had a benediction. It was beautiful. After the benediction, 2 surprises. High up on the left in that balcony at St. Paul's was a bugler. And that bugler played the haunting refrain, taps. You know, I do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of funerals. Every time taps is played at a gravesite, I tear up. It's that kind of emotive piece. We all know taps, universal signal, day has ended. As the last notes of taps went wafting through St. Paul's, a second surprise, high up on the right side of St. Paul's in the cathedral, a second bugler, and that bugler played Reveille. Universal signal, day has begun. That cigar-smoking, gin-drinking curmudgeon was also a faith-filled man, and he was sending us a message from heaven that when day ends down here, taps, it's just beginning up there, Reveille. Forever, perfect, growing, yes, perfect and growing, not a contradiction, because we're exposed to our God in our capacity for joy, happiness, peace, pleasure, fun, grows forever. We have that faith. We have that understanding. We've got all those other things, air conditioning, cars, houses, more clothes, more food than we can possibly use. But what we have that those people 35, 40,000 years ago did not have is that understanding that this doesn't end. Death is just simply a doorway that we walk through at the end of this phase of life to get to the far, 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 far better life in heaven. So what should we do this Lent to say thanks? I've already suggested we should pray. I'm suggesting 10 minutes. 10 minutes. You can break it up any kind of way you want. It's not very difficult. Do some in your car. Pray some. Give up, traditional Lenten give-ups. Father Mike gives up the same thing every year. I give up booze. For me, that's mostly single malt scotch. I give up nuts. I love nuts. About every other week, my supper is a bowl of nuts and about that much single malt scotch. I love it. Well, I'm not going to have it for 6 weeks. I give it up. I give up sweets, no big deal. You know, I like sweets, but I don't eat a lot of them. And I give up eating between meals, and I'm one of those lucky people. I eat when I'm hungry. It's not a discipline. It's just God's gift to me. It's genes, something. So giving up eating between meals is not a big deal, but I do it. What are your give-ups? Think about it. Give up something. Sacrifice. He sacrificed. We should sacrifice. But don't do just the don'ts. Don't drink scotch. Don't eat nuts. Do the do's. Take a trip down to Weinhoven. Talk to the administrator. Ask the administrator, tell me who is an extremely lonely person here at the nursing home who almost never and perhaps never has anyone come visit. Go visit that person once a week. Call up the archdiocese and say, hey, I'd like to be involved in the pro-life movement. Call us. We have a very active pro-life ministry. Get involved in saving the lives of babies. Call up the archdiocese and say, look, I'd like to go visit a prisoner. Tell me about a prisoner who has no one visiting him or her. Trust me, there are a lot of them. I know. So do the don'ts, but also do the do's. So that we, this Lent, can say thank you. Lent is a time of meditation and sacrifice. Negative sacrifice, positive sacrifice, all focused on the Son of God, meditating on the fact that we believe that at the end of this life, there's a far, far, far better life to come. My sisters and brothers, we are all called to be good stewards. And good stewards smile and say, thanks for Lent.